When talking about tourism, we really need to understand the reality of it without being blinded by the sweetness of it all. Tourism is an unstable industry. It has fluctuating income, westernization, and also economic disparities. This furthermore proves on how all of these factors are actually going to further impact a country that is still developing. When we're talking about developing countries here, for the purpose of this debate, I'll set the main parameter of discussion inside of Indonesia. Indonesia is, of course, a diverse country with cultural significance that still struggles with environmental contingency and is very much dependent on natural resources and needs a stable driver for improving its own economic growth. Why then do these things matter? Is because the main premise of our debate here is about on how tourism inside of status quo is affecting the vulnerable actors here who are the citizens of this said country. Before moving on towards my argument, we would like to acknowledge that yes, tourism has done good in helping the development of the country's financial and in helping the country's recognition and representation. But understand that here, we as government are actually going to prove to you judges on how tourism is actually much more harmful towards our vulnerable actors than what most people may think it is. Moving on, why we believe that tourism is harmful. With the context of knowing that on how diverse in terms of culture possessed by Indonesian citizens are and how they're still struggling with even economic growth to sprout amongst the locals, this gives us three key framing on why we believe tourism is much more harmful. One is environmentally. A, pollution. How the natural resources being deprived for the sake of building much more infrastructures and facilities, such as villas, is also causing a much more high usage of electricity and water, right? Where it also leads to much more of a high increase of waste each day, which and also the natural resources being damaged by both tourists and also tourism developers, such as let's say coral reefs, beach erosion, to build much more facilities and etc. Right? This proves on how this is actually harming the quality of living space for both local people and also the animals inhabiting the space itself. 2. Exploitation, environmental exploitation. Understand that coastal areas inside of tourist-centered areas are much more being overly developed to accommodate with tourism standards, which leads towards the overexploitation of the natural resources itself, i.e. such as the overfishing, the unstable land use for building much more infrastructures, and exploiting the local culture itself. Further elaboration will be said later in my argument. Now, moving on towards my second point is the economic struggles and economic equality that is faced by the locals. One, the significant segregation of income itself. I bet that most people have little to no idea that Bali is suffering from a high poverty rate caused by the high centralized tourism happening inside of there. Understand that the overdevelopment happening in one region while the other is overlooked, it's causing a significant segregation of the income and also economic growth of the region itself, which leads towards an uneven distribution of resources itself. For example, of this happening inside of the status quo, is let's say the resources for facilities in rural areas are actually much more hindered. Rural areas such as Buleleng and etc. are hindered. Instead, these type of resources actually being allocated and being majorly used in tourist-centered areas, let's say such as Denpasar and Gili and etc. Right? 2 is the extreme living cost. Understand with the rapid development of tourism itself, more and more demand for basic necessities is increasing. Also causing a higher price in comparison than other areas. Understand that the ability to afford proper housing, to gain accessibility for basic needs such as food, water and etc. has such a high cost for those who come from a middle to lower class. Not to mention that this type of middle to lower class has a higher rate in tourist-centered areas because of the segregation that I've said previously. And moving on, and third is the unstable dependency of economy inside of tourist-centered areas itself. Although yes, tourism has led to become one of the main drivers of economic growth for Indonesia, but understand why it is harmful is yet again because of the instability tourism provides to us. High fluctuating rates from income isn't suitable for a developing country because once the rates are low, the damages caused are also significant, i.e. the sudden spike of poverty rates in NTB and also Bali caused by the pandemic or any earthquakes, right? Not to mention that the dependency of seasonal peaks is also also affecting the personal financial income of locals who work in hospitality, which mind you is the major job field in tourist areas. 4 is the unfair startup chances, right? Understand that there are foreigners who actually have the chance to exploit the resources and the possible profit that these tourist-centered areas provide, right? Making and building villas with accessibility because they have the accessibility of a higher income coming from their origin country, which causes the unfair chance for any locals who also want to start a business based on tourism. This also leads to an unfair competition in starting a business where these said foreigners would have a higher advantage in receiving income in comparison to the local citizens themselves. And lastly is how this is actually affecting it culturally, right? One is the cultural exploitation that is happening. Exploiting the local culture and religion of locals for the sake of tourist marketing is becoming much more common inside of status quo. This actually could lead towards the disruption of these of the local practices practicing their culture, i.e. such as bule taking pictures of Hindu people praying, or at least tourist developers coming and marketing and exploiting traditional villages such as, let's say, Desa Sade, oftentimes treating the locals as attraction sites, degrading their dignity for profit and etc. These locals cannot do anything in peace because they're always going to be seen as an attraction site for any tourist from outside of the country. 2, arrogance for peace. There has been too many cases of tourists not caring for the local peace, right? Often looking down and treating people like dumb or lower people, making them have this type of mentality that they can do whatever they want inside of the country, i.e. hundreds of cases of bule ugal-ugalan, endangering the safety of themselves and others, vandalizing and the rented property, being rude towards the locals, and etc. Right? And third of all, lastly, is the westernization. The increasing rates of assimilation affecting the integrity of the local culture itself, especially towards the youth who are slowly moving away from their own culture and is being affected by the rapid modernization happening in their region, right? Which causes a higher interest in Western culture and lifestyle. Also, the cultural authenticity will decrease with the further standardization of tourism demands and wants, i.e. changing and the essence of said culture to accommodate more with the comfortability of tourists for the sake of a higher market interest, leading to a possibility of cultural appropriation. So in Delta of my debate, we have been able to prove to you panels on why it is justified for us to believe in the reality of harms that tourism inside of status quo has done towards the vulnerable actors in this debate. We do believe that the chance of improvement, but we do not. But do note that the main premise here is on why and how tourism has affected the citizen and status quo itself, and now we are able to prove it to you from various sectors. That's why we believe that we have the upper hand inside of this debate. Thank you very much.